Hello everyone, Bladen Breitreiter, Incident Meteorologist, and this is a weather update and fire behavior update for Sunday, July 27th. So we've had a couple very dry days. You can kind of see here, this is simple water vapor imagery, and this is looking at water vapor at all levels of the atmosphere. It creates a composite using colors to kind of show us where that moisture is. And if you look kind of in our neck of the woods here in northwestern New Mexico, you can see that there's not a whole lot of color going on. At most, we're seeing a little bit of green, and green denotes that we have water vapor at high levels of the atmosphere, but not necessarily anything below. If you look to the west, you see there's a good bit of moisture out there, and then if you look over to the east across Texas, you do see that there is moisture trying to kind of push into southeastern New Mexico at this time, but we're right in the middle, stuck in the middle with all of this dry air. So overnight, we saw recoveries getting up into, at most, 39%. Our raws up at Dead Man's Peak only got up to 22%. And so that's incredibly poor. And what recovery is it's basically showing us what the maximum humidity is overnight. During the day when the temperatures are high, we see our minimum humidity. And then as the nighttime cools, we see those humidity come up. And that's when we hit our max. We like to see it get above at least 60%. That gets us more into the fair to good categories. And then once, we get some of those monsoonal rains, that's when we see our best recovery getting closer to that 80 to even 100%. So last night coming in between 22 and 39, not that great. So that's going to set the stage today. We're again going to see another very dry day, really no thunderstorms expected. We're going to see our relative humidity minimums get down back into the low double digits, so maybe 10 to 12%. And then also we'll see in and around the fire get into the single digits as well. The good news is our wind today is going to be reduced. We're not going to see as widespread of gusts getting up towards that 25 mile an hour mark. Instead, we're going to see the majority of our winds stay around 10 to 15 miles an hour with more localized 20 mile an hour in more of those wind-prone areas. The last thing we have to look at is temperatures, and it's still going to be another hot day. Our lowlands out there are probably going to creep up into the mid-90s. Up in the high terrain, looking into the mid-80s, upper 80s, maybe trying to flirt with the 90s as we get into the heat of the afternoon. So that's kind of what we're looking at today. We'll take a look at the matrix real quick. All right. So here we are on Sunday. You can see that we're getting into an average max temperature, getting into those 90s. Minimum humidity values are getting down into those lower double digits, so 12%. Little bit of spattering of those single digits as well. It's very unstable, and remember, air in its natural state just wants to fall down. Just like me, it's really tired. It wants to lay down. So instability shows us that rising air is going to be in play today. Very unstable. So if you see a lot of dust devils, that's part of it. Winds 5 gusts 10. Going to be more slope dominated with that. So favoring those terrain influences for its direction. And then, of course, because it is the monsoon season, we always retain a little bit of lightning probability just on the chance that any moisture is recycled and we see those storms fire over the high terrain. So today is very fire weather based still. As we go into the overnight hours, it does look like we have an easterly push. If we could pop back to the satellite imagery real quick, kind of show you what that looks like. That is this right here. This is going to try to slowly make its way across the state of Texas, get into New Mexico, and try to rush up into our neck of the woods. Now, the uncertainty is how robust it's going to be once it has to come from these low elevations of Texas, fight its way all the way up into northwestern New Mexico. How potent is it still going to be once it gets here? But either way, it does look like we'll see a change in our wind directions. We might see winds tick up a little bit overnight because of it, but it's a very uncertain thing as we go into the overnight period. Let's turn back to the matrix real quick, look at what we have in store for the rest of the week. As we go into Monday, you can see just by looking at lightning probability that the storms are coming back. We're going to get a little bit of an increase in moisture thanks to that push that we're seeing overnight. And then as we get into the midweek, that's when we'll finally see yet another monsoonal surge come into play, when we see our lightning probabilities and our probabilities for precip tick up 50%, 60% as we get into the Wednesday, Thursday time frame. So we'll see temperatures cool down a little bit. Moisture will come up a little bit. Thankfully, our winds outside of thunderstorm outflows stay relatively light, but we do get the added hazards of thunderstorms, which will be sudden erratic wind gusts, sudden wind shifts, lightning, of course, which lightning into receptive fuel beds, not anything that we want, and, of course, brief and localized heavy rainfall, which, if you're hanging out in that area of the Rio Chama, be very aware of that as we move forward through the rest of monsoon season, because we could see burn scar flash flooding with this. It takes very little rain to create some very high impacts in those areas where we've seen fire in the last year or so. So that's all I have for you for weather. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to fire behavior.
Thanks, Bladen. Stewart Turner, fire behavior analyst. I'm the fire behavior analyst for the team. What I do as a fire behavior analyst is I predict what the fire is going to do, where it's going to go, and how fast it's going to get there. So I'm looking at three things. I'm looking at the fuels, the topography, and the weather. And the weather is going to be the driving factor for today and into tomorrow for the fire behavior. The weather's hot and dry, and what that does, it dries out those fine dead fuels. And those fine dead fuels are the twigs, the blades of grass, the pine needles, those type of things out there that carry the fire. That's the major carrier of these big forest fires, those small fuels. And as they dry out today, they'll become more and more available to burn. And that's going to be the problem for today's fire behavior. So a couple areas that I'm really concerned about is this in the La Presa Canyon here. We're still getting a little bit of movement in there. However, we're keeping that in check. But the dryness just keeps persisting, and that fire tries to move a little bit. Last night, it moved very little because of the work that we did yesterday with the helicopters in there. So that's a good stroke. But I do expect to see a little bit of smoke in there, a little bit of movement. But I'm not thinking we'll get a big movement at all in there. Nothing really around the face of the fire on the east side. And as we get up to the northeast corner, yesterday we saw a little bit of movement in there as it got into some unburned fuels, moved down into some scabbier fuels where the fine dead fuels were not as available. They were just too much dirt and rock and things like that down there, so the fire eventually burned itself out and stopped spreading. That's where we saw the smoke, and there's a couple areas in there that has some fuel that may try to burn today if it dries out enough. And if that's available, it will try to get around there. As we come around to the west side of the fire, I'm not anticipating any movement there, nor on the southwest portion of the fire, not anticipating any movement. That's been locked in for several days. We really don't have the heat sources down there for that fire to move around, so no fire behavior there. As we come through the south end of the fire, once again, very little available fuels there, and we don't have the heat sources down there for that fire to initiate and start to move around. So really the only places are going to be in the La Presa and then in the northeast corner of the fire that I think we might see a little bit of activity today. With this dry weather, what it does, it helps us remove those fuels ahead of the fire so that it stops the spread. So actually this dry weather is playing right into what we want. Get rid of those fuels so that we stop that spread and we can put this fire to bed. Thank you.